Hello, everyone. I'm Janine Donnelly, Manager of Webinars for Tech Channel, and I'd like to welcome you to our presentation. We will be holding a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. You may ask a question at any time during the event by entering it into the Q&A panel. If you experience technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the Q&A panel to alert us, and someone will assist you. You may download a PDF version of today's slide deck by clicking on the drop-down menu labeled Event Resources. Click on the Slide tab, and know that you can download those right from the platform without being disconnected from the webinar. Today's webinar is sponsored by Fortra. Our featured speaker today is Sandy Moore, Principal Security Consultant for Fortra. Sandy's been working with Fortra customers for almost 20 years, helping them to effectively address systems monitoring and cybersecurity challenges on IBM. Organizations throughout the public and private sector rely on Sandy's expertise, whether they're looking to proactively protect their systems or improve security controls after a malware attack. And so with that, Sandy, I'll turn the presentation over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Janine. All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. We're going to talk about how we can avoid some of the biggest mistakes in IBM security. So really what I wanted to do was highlight some of these mistakes that we see that customers are making, that companies are making on their IBM systems, and give you some information on ways that you can avoid making those same mistakes, or if you're already in that boat and you're kind of that's where you're at, things you can do to remediate that. So really trying to focus on the ways that we can move forward and making a positive impact in the environment and also securing those servers so that the business can continue to run on what is very often the core server for a business. So when we talk about these mistakes, one of the first ones that comes to my mind is denial. So really this is where we are denying that there is actually even a security threat to the IBM. You know, this platform is so reliable, so stable, that we tend to dismiss it as a concern. One of the reasons that we do that is because IBM has actually told us that the system is secure. So on their own website, they've touted this. And while this reputation is not unearned, the concern here is that in and of itself, the system doesn't ship that way by default. So it's not so much that the IBM is a secure operating system, but it's more of a secureable. So we have to take advantage of the configurations that the system allows for in order to get these systems to that secure state. Now, 100% secure system is one that's unplugged from the network. And I have people tell me that all the time, and that's not a feasible option. We can't do that. We have to maintain the availability versus the securability of that information that's stored on the server. Now, you're probably wondering, why does Sandy know that so many people don't take advantage of these security controls? It's because we actually do a State of IBM security study every year. We collect anonymous audit data from customer systems and with our security scan tool, and we compile those statistics of what we see on customer systems, not us guessing what people are doing, but we're actually looking at what those configurations are on servers, and we are compiling it into our report. And so what this is showing us, though, year over year, is that there's need and room for improvement on these servers. So despite the fact that we've been doing this for 20 years and that we've been helping customers to be able to get their systems to a more secure state, there still needs some improvement. So there's a lot of things to do, and really taking your time to decide how you're going to do it is an important part of this. So, but denying that there's a threat at all is really not going to get you to that place where the system is not going to be as readily compromised. So, part of that denial is that, assuming that the IBMI is secure, and it does happen, and we have people say, well, it's the IBMI. Yeah, well, guess what? It's another server. It is not unique in that. All of your users that connect to it is going to attract attention. So threat actors that are in an environment are going to see that traffic pointing to that server, and they are going to go after that server. So it's not thinking that it's not going to come under attack is really kind of naive, because it is absolutely does come under attack. We see it come under attack all the time. I have multiple customers I work with that have been hit by ransomware, and the ransomware hitting the IFS is a critical problem. And when those systems are unusable and your IT team is spending hours and days and sometimes weeks or even months trying to recover and figure out how we're going to get that system back up and available, that's a problem. So these servers do come under attack. We just, because we have kind of that belief that nobody understands it, that it's not going to be a target, we tend to not actually have enough defenses in place. And security alert fatigue is another part of that. We just kind of get overwhelmed with information about all of the breaches that are happening all the time. And, some of them are really high profile. I'm thinking of the MGM attack recently, and, this is a big deal. But there are so many companies that it is happening to that we don't hear about. And it's kind of like that iceberg where we see the tip of it and the rest of the attacks are kind of swept underneath, and we're not realizing how much it actually does occur. I actually had to stop watching and reading the articles on how many breaches there have been, just because it's just overwhelming. So, but it doesn't mean we can just ignore the fact that there is a threat to the system. We have to acknowledge it and take the next steps to start getting that system to that more secure state. Another thing that we do see as far as mistakes on the system is reliance. And so by reliance, I mean that we are relying on minimal layers of control. I have so many conversations with customers that start with, well, my IBMI is behind the firewall. It should be. That is a given. But the firewall itself is not enough. We have to have multiple layers of control. If one layer fails, we need another one behind it to step up and hopefully prevent further damage to the system. So when we look at that, when I'm talking with firewalls, I actually was just reading yesterday, Cisco's has the vulnerabilities and their devices are being compromised. So these are the things that are going to fail, and if it's your only layer of protection that's between you, your system, and the threat actors, they're not going to have a very hard time of causing issues. So every layer of control is going to be critical. Your green screen menus and application controls, these are valuable if the user is going through the approved expected interface. But what it does is masks the exposures that are actually there. The IBMI has so many connection points to the system beyond the green screen, and without having proper controls in place, you have no visibility to who's using it. In other words, if you've got a user that has access to the system, authority to the databases, or to be able to run a program or run a command, we've allowed this green screen menu to restrict their access. They have access to FTP server, the file server, ODBC server, all of these side doors to the system that you have no visibility to. So ensuring that you have put layers of control to monitor who's using these other interfaces and be able to stop inappropriate use of those is critical. I say all the time when I'm evaluating security settings on customer systems is that the threat actors aren't going to use a green screen. They are not going to use that interface. They're not going to configure a 5250 session and try to break through your menus that do such a good job of controlling access. They're going to use one of those other TCP interfaces to get to the system. And we see it happen with FTP, customers, users trying to gain access through a different interface. Maybe they've run up against a challenge and they can't do this one thing that they want to do or they need to do or they think they need to do. And so they take a shortcut or they take a back door. Hiring new employees, you don't know what their experience is. And sometimes they have learned shortcuts at other jobs that might not be appropriate for your environment. So really having those multiple layers of control is going to be critical. The human layer, of course, is the one that is going to be the most problematic in that we tend to rely on them not knowing what they can do. I've had a customer the other day who was telling me their users didn't know how to do anything. They were not technical. But the concern we had was that they had a lot of all object profiles on their system, and they said, well, we're not worried about it because they don't know how to do anything. And that's not enough. User ignorance is just obscuring the problem, and it's not the users who are actually causing the problem. It's somebody who has access to the user's access, so they have been taken advantage of. So we have to educate the users on what's expected, but also make sure that we are monitoring what they're doing and having the ability to control that. A user doesn't need all object authority. A user doesn't need SecAdmin unless they're the administrator, but then we need to track of when they're taking advantage of those controls. So every layer is critical in this so that as we progress through the system, we know that things are going to be managed. Relying solely on endpoint security for your workstations, that can fail, and then when that does fail, whatever they were gaining access to is now compromised. So on the IBM itself, making sure that you have the correct layers of control, using exit programs to control access, using programs that use adopt authority to give users the correct access, ensuring that your applications are appropriate as well. And are they introducing new security issues, or are they solving a problem? I was talking with a company the other day that they had a programmer who retired, and they said, yeah, he's written a ton of programs and we have no idea what they do. But we can't remove them because we're pretty sure something will break. So not knowing what applications are doing on your system is another layer that can present a security issue. So really ensuring that you're familiar with your applications and what their intended use is, and if it does in fact align with the business. So really having every layer possible is critical. The currency. So I would love to say this is about money, and I guess ultimately a security breach or a security incident does end up costing you money, but by currency I mean the currency of your system. So how current is your technology? So we need to make sure that we are maintaining and staying up to date on operating system levels and security patches. So you can actually sign up for emailed notifications from IBM to stay current so you know what's happening. There have been a couple of CVEs this year that are critical security issues for IBM. So it doesn't come up often, but there have been a couple recently. So, these are the things that are easy to avoid, and making these mistakes is something that we can easily resolve by maintaining that OS level. And, ensuring that you are staying current and then planning for the future, because these operating systems, they don't stick around as long as we think, and we get a little complacent on that one. So as you're updating those operating system levels and maintaining those security patches, focus on your applications as well. So your third-party applications should be tested against each new operating system level, and working with your vendors to ensure that you are running the most current version. Those vendors are going to maintain those applications, and they're going to accommodate for changes of the operating system. So implementing new controls or accommodating changes that have been made. So ensuring that the application is matching up with the OS levels. Now, infrastructure changes are another part of that. So you're not an island with the IBMI, and sometimes it might feel like it. And you might be one of those folks that wears many hats and you're in charge of everything. So you're going to understand those infrastructure changes better than others, but maintaining an understanding of how your entire environment is being updated and modified is a critical function as well. So new connectivity that could be available, a new web service that provides an interface that now potentially is exposing IBMI data to users that were unexpected. And so really getting a good feel for that is going to help you to maintain how your security on the IBMI is going to be managed so that we don't inadvertently end up creating an easy access to the server because of new technology that has been introduced. Another mistake that we often see is not recognizing the origin of security threats to the IBMI. So where do these come from? I kind of alluded to the mysterious threat actor. So this is the threat actor that we think of because of the movies and TV, and we see the dramatic music in the background where it's this hooded individual that's sitting in a dark room and they're breaking into our servers. But the reality is for the IBMI, the security threats are more often an insider threat. So these are users that, individuals that have access to our system, and they are very often part of that compromise. Actually, I was looking at some statistics yesterday, and between 2018 and 2022, there was a 47% increase in insider threats being the source of security incidents. So that's a big deal. So these insiders are a big part of the problem. And last year, 31% of data breaches were in fact tied to an insider, whether it's a contractor, an employee, or a vendor that was involved was given access to an environment and part of that compromise. So the reality is that people can be compromised, their integrity can be compromised, and sometimes they're tricked into being the compromise. And so we have to understand that these users that have the authority to the system and they have gained that access, once they're compromised, whether it's their integrity or in fact just the fact that they have clicked through on a phishing email, they are now part of that problem. I actually, I had wild experience in Chicago airport a couple years ago, and actually it's been more than that. We forget that there's a gap in time there where we didn't travel. But I was in the Chicago airport and standing in line at a coffee place, and there's two gentlemen in front of me. And the guy was talking to the other guy, and he says, yeah, so when so-and-so left the company, apparently he downloaded the entire customer database and took it with him to his new job. And I thought to myself, you know what? That's the problem right there, is that users are able to do that type of inappropriate activity. The fact that they can and get to the system, they can get to a server, they can grab that data and walk out with it, those are the things that are avoidable. When we talk about compromised credentials, so credentials are easily compromised. So everything we do, we're going to add complex passwords. So making sure that we get onto the system, we've got some strong password settings. We even add MFA, so a second factor of authentication before they get to that server. Well, I actually just read yesterday that Okta's had a breach. So that is going to compromise some of that multi-factor authentication. But those compromised credentials, it doesn't take all of your users' credentials to be compromised. It only takes one. So one user with a compromised credential can gain access. We'll circle back to the MGM comment I made. One profile was compromised. Someone posing as that user called into the help desk and managed to convince them to reset the password and email to an external email address. So one user caused millions of dollars of damage. So overly privileged users are a part of that problem. So when users have too much authority on the system, they are going to be the source of those breaches. So ensuring that users have the least privilege possible for the job that they need to do. When we look at our State of IBM Security study, every year we have entirely too many users with too much authority on the system, whether it's the system with 90% of their users have all object authority because that's just the way they've always done it, or it is the system where all of the libraries on their server are set to all or change. So the fact that users can get to everything on the system, it exposes the system. So really moving towards a least privilege posture, and if the user doesn't need access, don't let them have it. Don't assume that the other layers that control you have in place are going to hold up. So take away those authorities and ensure that we don't have those potential exposures. Basically, it boils down to your users. These are going to be, this is the access to the server. This is where it's going to happen. So we have to recognize that and start evaluating and maintaining those users in an appropriate way, as opposed to assuming that they're not going to be part of the problem. All right, so preparation. So preparing for the eventual disaster. The better you're prepared, the faster you're going to recover. So ensuring that you have a plan in place and recognize that when you have a security incident, and don't say if you're going to have a security incident, it's going to be when. It's going to be more of a matter of how big is it, how far-reaching is it, and how much of our environment is involved. So how are you going to recover from that? Recoveries are not all the same. So if you have a hardware failure, you're going to restore from backups, or you're going to roll over to your HA system. When a security incident, doesn't quite work that way. You're going to need to be able to recover what has been damaged in that incident, or potentially identify what was modified in that security incident, what records were compromised, and how are you going to identify that? So going back to the ransomware attacks, high availability is not your friend. So you've got to have another alternative way of recovering, because if a file is damaged on your production system, it is going to be replicated, damaged to your target system. So having an additional layer of recovery is essential when we're talking about security incidents. So really what I would do is take a step back and really identify your plan. Who's going to be responsible for which parts of recovery, and who's going to reach out to the vendors? Who is going to work with the board of directors and explain to them what happened? Who is going to contact law enforcement? So these security incidents that these breaches, ransomware attacks should be reported to officials. FBI actually has their own unit that deals with this. So ensuring that they're aware of what's happening because the more they know, the more that they can go after the threat actors and start cracking down on it further. And they've actually had a new recent bust as well of another ransomware gang. So going after that. But really going back to establishing that plan, ensuring that we know who's supposed to do what. You know, you don't want to have the panic button hit and have everybody running around not knowing what to do. So having those responsibilities laid out very clearly as to who's responsible for what. And then once you've established that plan, really consider testing it. So do that fire drill or that earthquake drill and ensure that you know that everything you've set forth as your plan and those key personnel are going to be able to handle it and that they are going to understand what their jobs are in that event. So not waiting until you have that security incident to see if it's going to work. So you need to test it. I have had multiple customers. I have a company that I talked to about security in general, and we were talking about replication, and he said, yeah, well, our HA software, we never really got it configured properly, so we've actually never done a rollover to see if it works. So those are the kinds of things that are going to end up causing a lot of pain. You have to understand how it's going to work and make sure that you have all of the right pieces in place. All right, so another mistake that we often see is underutilization. So instead of using your system as is, we really want to see that you start invoking the tools that are available to you. Going back to the secure versus secureable, secureable means that there is some assembly required to take advantage of those security measures that are available on the system. So underutilization of the tools is rampant, unfortunately. So what we really want to encourage is that you are using the tools available already. So these are the baby steps. Set those system values to best practice. So go through all of those system values that help to protect the integrity of your operating system and ensure that they're set to an appropriate value. We do see that the defaults are left in place. IBM provides the system values, but they don't make the decision for you as to what is best practice. You have to decide, and you have to take those steps to change those. So I do encourage making one change at a time. Don't do massive changes all at once because you want to be able to identify if something stops behaving the way you expect, that you can easily revert back because, your system's been running under the assumption that things are going to behave a certain way. And when you start putting security controls in place, you have to understand how that may impact how you're doing things now so you can change it. System security level. So that's one of the first ones we evaluate when we look at customer systems. And security level 40 is how systems are shipped currently. And we still see systems that are being rolled back to security level 30 and sometimes even security level 20 still. I heard a vicious rumor from one of my colleagues that they came across a system that was set to security level 10. So we're not even sure how that happened. But, these are the things that you can take action on and start gaining some control over that. There's, a whole slew of system values. We tend to focus on some of the highest risk, QAllow object restore, QVerify object restore, and even QMAX sign-on. So, and the QMAX sign action. How many invalid sign-in attempts does a user get on your system before your system's going to react and hopefully at least disable the user profile? I run into systems all the time that have QMAX or the QMAX sign set to no max. So users have unlimited attempts to sign on to a server. And when we circle back to the overprivileged users, and insider threats being the most common. Some profile that has unlimited sign-on attempts is going to end up being compromised. Eventually, that password is going to be guessed, and they are going to gain access to the server. So making sure and not assuming that your system values are set appropriately. So regular review of those is advised as well. IBM does include security tools that you can use to manage your user profiles. There is on the Sec Tools menu, you've got an option to automatically disable user profiles if they've gone dormant for too long. So you can choose how long that is going to be. It could be 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. But the idea here is that profiles that are not being used, that are not associated with an employee, should be disabled at a minimum. Ultimately, they should be deleted, not left on the system. But by disabling them, someone's not going to be able to sign on with that profile anymore. So automating it can take away that, that burden on an administrator who probably wears way too many hats. I hear, yeah, well, I'm everything, and security is not that person's first task. So this is really going to make things easier. Security Tools also has an option for analyzing default passwords. So use that report and analyze your system to see how many users have a user ID and password matching. It's actually usually pretty surprising how many are on a system, and making sure that those users are not allowed to maintain that default password. That will be one of the first things a threat actor is going to try, is if they've established an idea of what your profile names are, Sandy M or S Moore, whatever that profile pattern is, they're going to try the user profile as the password. That's the first try. So if you've allowed users to maintain those default passwords, then this is where you're going to end up with a compromise. So third thing is to activate auditing on the system. So again, included with the operating system, you have the ability to audit security activity on the system. You just have to activate it. So making sure that QAuditor exists and that you have the correct audit values set, so you can actually see those authority failures for those invalid sign-in attempts. You can see the changes to a database. You can see the delete of an object off your system, or, oh, look at this, somebody created a new profile on the system. I wonder who that was. Oh, wait, look, they have all object authority. Oh, they have SecAdmin, they have, this is a new admin profile and we don't know who it is. So those are the kinds of things that you want to make sure that you are actually logging, so that you can go regularly review it and see what's happening on the system. All of these tools are included in the system, but very often we see is that it's not actually being taken advantage of. Sometimes I see that there's an audit journal in place, but there is in fact no security information being audited. They've only audited the creation and deletion of objects on the system for replication. So unfortunately, security information like those invalid sign attempts, those program failures, the use of system service tools, those things aren't going to be part of replication, so they're not audited. So you have to turn on those additional auditing options, but also make sure that you're actively using that audit data and that somebody is actually looking at it. Because if you can identify suspicious activity early enough, you can stop the actual incident before it occurs. So being aware of it as that, that stage is being set can be a big part of heading off the security incident. All right, another mistake we see is inaction. So the lack of taking action. Unfortunately, there is obviously a ton of information. There can be extremely overwhelming. And of course, we all wear a lot of hats and we have a lot of responsibilities, and very often security is not the first one. I do talk to a lot of people that say, yeah, well, I'm the administrator, but I also am this, this, and this. And so they don't have the time, they don't have the ability to learn everything there is to know. I've been doing this for 20 years and I still learn new things every day. So this is a big task, and very often it paralyzes people and they don't do anything at all. So one of the things you can do to actually start moving forward is to evaluate what needs to be done. There could be hundreds of items, so really deciding what you're going to tackle first. You can use that, a matrix to determine where do we focus our attention. Look for the changes that have a high impact and low effort. That's your lowest hanging fruit. So focus there first. And what are the things you can do that's going to get you immediate additional security on the system, and then start moving towards that high impact, and maybe it's going to be more effort. But really focusing on those pieces. And prioritizing each of those items on that list and developing a plan. This is not something that needs to happen all at once. These servers I've talked to cousins, we've had this server for 30 years. I do a save, I do a restore, and I keep the same configuration. So for 30 years, these settings have been in place, so these changes don't need to happen overnight. So really it's about establishing that plan going forward. What steps do we need to take? What are the most logical ones to do first? And then start moving through. So this one makes the most sense. This is going to give us the most impact immediately. Now let's start thinking about the next step. So let's deal with the invalid sign-on attempts. That's a really low-hanging fruit, and the effort there is minimal. You change the system value, and now you have at least established a control. So now look at the next step. All object users. All right, so how are we going to deal with this? Well, okay, let's take a look at maybe putting a compromising control in place. While we figure out if we can take away all objects, maybe we put exit programs in place, and this is going to stop this activity. What are our highest risks to the system? Malware attacks or ransomware attacks, because we've shared the root directory. Okay, so that should move to the front of the line for what we need to do next. Put in technology for anti-ransomware so that we can stop those attacks and the files being damaged on the system. So each of these steps can help, and maybe assigning it to different users. Maybe it needs to be contracting with a business partner to assist you with that. Contracting with a security vendor like Fortra. So those might be the things of figuring out what can I do, what should I get help with, and what should I turn over to somebody else to maintain it for me. So really figuring out who could be responsible for it, and focusing on those things that are really going to provide the biggest controls, the biggest impact as quickly as possible. So hopefully you have not been one of those companies that's been hit, but it does pose a big issue. Of course, if we look back at the underutilization of the tools that are available on the system, if you're not auditing, you don't even know what may have happened on the system. So sometimes it's about being able to start having visibility first so that you do know what the next steps are that need to be taken. All right, so not taking action, let's talk about what I think you should do next. So my call to action for you is to think about assessing the risk of a breach on your servers. So really, we've talked about a lot of the things that could be a problem on the system. So how do you figure out where to start? How do you get that view of what's happening on the system? So we provide, and I mentioned it in the beginning, is a security scan. So this security scan analyzes 6 areas of security on your system, and it breaks it down into usable bytes. So full color, really understanding what each of those areas of concern are, what your settings are, so that you can actually start establishing a plan. You don't know what you don't know. So by using our security scan, you can actually get a picture of what is happening on your server. How many admin profiles do I have? And I like to remind people that admin profiles are not necessarily part of somebody's job title. You don't have 100 administrators, but you don't have that many users on the system that should have that level of access, but you very may well have more than that. So really being able to step back, take that 30,000-foot view is going to give you that ability to actually decide which steps are you going to take next. What do I need to be concerned about? Where do I start? So the security scan does, it is a free tool, which doesn't happen a lot. Free is good, right? So gives you the ability to run that scan. It only takes a couple of minutes. It can be done during the middle of the business day. There is it's not non-intrusive, does not access application data, and will even provide you an hour review of those results so we can help interpret them. What does it mean for your company? Did you have compensating controls in place that maybe reduced what popped up on that scan? So really trying to help you understand what your current security posture is so you can make an informed decision as to what steps you need to take next. A lot of companies that start here and will actually circle back and come back and do a scan again a year later. And we'll talk about, what changes they've made, what steps have they taken. Sometimes they haven't been able to get that project off the ground yet, and they need to remind management that, in fact, the system is still vulnerable. So sometimes it takes a couple of tries to get support for security projects. And so, there can be an investment of time that is involved there. So being able to show the value of it, I think, is helpful. So assessing that risk of a breach, of course, once you've done so, there's, Fortra, we do have a lot of solutions to assist customers with remediation and services as well. So whether it's doing further vulnerability assessments and evaluating at a much granular level what the security risks are on their system, intrusion prevention and detection. So talk about a lot about that. Encrypting data at rest. So if you have sensitive data on your system, are you protecting at rest, and do you have requirements for that? I do talk to a lot of customers that have their relationships with vendors or online selling platforms require that customer data is encrypted at rest. So sometimes these requirements are asked and we don't even realize that we have the ability on IBMI to meet those requirements. Identification and access management, security policy management. So something that we don't think about, but you spend a lot of time updating your security settings on the system. How are you going to keep if they are staying within that policy? So being able to maintain that security policies on your system. You can do automated as well as a manual process. But for compliance and audit reporting, virus and ransomware protection, I talk a lot about that. But that's probably one of the number one threat to a system, any environment, is ransomware attacks. Secured managed file transfer. So if you are moving data on and off the system, you want to make sure that the integrity of that data as well as the credentials being used are actually going to be protected. And then you also have an audit trail of that data, where it went and how it went and where and what was sent and by whom. So really having that full visibility. And of course, the security integrity monitoring. If you have SOX compliance requirements, you need to know who's able and who is changing your databases, who has access to what records. And having visibility to that is a critical part of meeting those requirements. So a lot of solutions. Our services team can help with that as well. So really being able to pull together the solutions and providing you with an additional team of experts. So, if you wear many hats and don't have the time to become a security expert, don't have that 20 years to spend figuring all this stuff out, that's where that team can help as well. So managing security on your system so that you've got the ability to tackle all the other projects that are put on your plate. We have a ton of resources on our website, so you can visit our website at fortran.com, but you'll be able to access videos of different software, trial downloads if you want to actually give it a run on your system, product information data sheets, so guides and technical articles focused on different concerns in the business sector, customer success stories, those are always helpful. How do people implement? How do people solve problems? And actually having those real world ideas can be extremely helpful. How-to articles, as well as you requesting a security scan. So being able to do that security scan and actually evaluate the security on your server so you can see what mistakes you might currently be making on your system and be able to address it and know exactly what you need to remediate. All right, I think we're ready for questions. So,
great, Sandy. We do have some questions. The very first question we got is, how do I get a security scan? I'm going to go back to this resource page and let you know that these are live links. So for our attendees, you can click on the link for the free security scan. It will open in a separate window and be available to you following the webinar. So you might want to do that. And also for those who join late, I think you're going to want a copy of the slide deck. So be sure to check out event resources, click on the drop-down menu, select the slide deck, and download that before we conclude. So Sandy, I think we covered that first question. Let's go to the next one. Okay, I like this. It said, we had a user turn on auditing and they filled up the disk. Do you have any suggestions for auditing configurations?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know that I have encouraged you to use your audit journal, but you have to use some caution there, understanding your environment. And you don't have to turn on all of the audit values. So that is absolutely one of the first steps. Focus on the ones that are going to give you the most critical security information, and we can help with that. We do have a list of the audit values and the ones that we consider high importance and focusing on those. Our security services team actually can do an engagement with you to help set up your audit journal and then fine tune it as well and help you manage those journal receivers. So it is definitely a bit of a fire hose, so you do have to use caution and ensuring that you understand what that full impact is.
Okay. Here's the next one. Our users don't have direct access to the system. So, admitting we haven't done much with security, and then it says we're good, right?
Yeah, so I love that. So we have, in ERP systems, there are a couple of ERP providers that have a generic profile that users have a web interface. They don't even know that the IBMI is behind the scenes. And they tell me this, oh, the users don't have direct access. But the problem is there are users that have access. Those administrators have access to the system, and very often when we have interfaces or systems that are not direct access by the general users, there's even less attention paid to security, because this is that true security by obscurity. So what we'll see happen is that the administrators end up being the ones that are compromised. They're the ones that have created that root share because they know best. And they're the ones who end up being compromised. So you still have to address security on the system, best practices, because and go back to one profile. That's all it takes is one profile being compromised. And, the system's not an island. You do have to access the system as an administrator, and you could very well be that source of an issue. So It's not a free pass there on users not directly accessing. Still needs to be addressed. All right, Janine, I think we lost your audio there. Uh-oh. All right, so I don't think we're getting Janine's audio. We really appreciate you guys joining today. You can visit our website. We had the URL up there as well, or you can email info@fortra.com. So you'll be able to gain more information. And if, yep, it looks like I've got you're welcome. So hopefully this has provided you guys with some good food for thought and some information to think about for future.
Thank you, Sandy.
Yeah, sorry, Janine, we lost you there.
I could hear you, but you couldn't hear me. So everything Sandy said, don't forget to check out techchannel.com for all the latest on all things tech. That concludes our webinar. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.